welcome to Keys of the Kingdom. I'm Brother Gregory, and we're going to talk again about the Kingdom of God. And I sent out a notice just as the show was starting to the network, which everybody should be a part of, that somebody can suggest a topic or ask a question, and they can do that through the network, or if they insist upon it, they can probably join us in the chat room. I'm not watching the chat room, but somebody does. And maybe some questions will come up, and we'll try to address them in the latter half of the show, but or this podcast, or however you want to, however you hear this eventually. I had thought about talking. I've been writing a lot lately, and thought about talking about the law of nature, which is also defined as divine will, which is also defined as right reason. And they've been defined this way, all three of them defining themselves as each other for centuries and centuries and centuries. It is not a new idea. And natural law is not a law that is legislated by men. It's not created by men. It's believed to have already pre-existed by nature, by right reason, by divine will, if you believe in God. And lots of people tell me that they believe in God, but they don't necessarily act like they believe in God. Or some people tell me they don't believe in God, but they don't act like they don't believe in God. So believing in God is, people say it. Well, what does it actually mean to believe in God? What does it actually mean to believe at all? The term believe has changed over the centuries quite a bit from what most people think it means today. Believe today is people think that if you believe something, it's what you think. You believe what you think. But faith and words like belief actually has to do with what you do more than what you think. It makes you act. Belief is conviction, and that conviction makes you act. You cannot resist it. You have already started the toboggan down the hill, and you can't stop it. You can only maybe steer it within the confines of where you're at a given time. That is what belief is. It is not just what you think. Religion is not just what you think. Pure religion is what you do. It's how you take care of one another, how you love your neighbor as yourself. Are you forgiving? Are you giving? These are the keys to the kingdom of God. What do you look to for righteousness, for justice? People talk a lot about social justice these days. But, I mean, what is social justice? What is democratic socialism? These terms are all found over on the same side of the aisle. But why are we putting these adjectives, social justice? Isn't justice just justice? And is justice just the enforcement of law? And then enforcement of what law? Legal systems are created within the natural law. They're not just created out of thin air, generally speaking. You can't just make a legal system up. It requires consent and agreement, and that consent and agreement, in order for that legal system to be valid, follows certain parameters that are considered reasonable or back to right reason. But then where does divine will come into it? Well, for those who assume or presume or believe that there is a God, that there is a divine design in the universe, that we didn't just come out of coincidence of molecules bouncing together until they formed amoebas, and amoebas formed us over long stretches of time, that there's actually a design in nature to bring about life. Life has a motivation. It's not just a coincidence. you wouldn't have the stable genetics that we have. You find life everywhere on this planet, and yet they can't find life anywhere else in the solar system or in the universe. They thought for sure they would start picking up electromagnetic waves, radio waves from distant stars where life existed, that those waves are going out there, so they make a huge antenna, and they listen, and they listen, and they listen, and they're not finding it. We supposedly see, according to some people, extraterrestrial life, UFOs, what have you. There's all kinds of reports of that over the centuries, but we don't find any life out in the universe. It all seems to be hovering around this planet. So what is it? And on the surface of the planet, in the Arctic, and in the subterranean areas of the ocean where light doesn't even arrive, around the mouth of volcanoes, life is existing, depending upon the energy of the volcano rather than the sun. What is that? Why is there so much life in this planet? Just coincidence? Just accidents of nature? In such inhospitable environments, actually in boiling pools of hot water, they find what appears to be life living on a silicate basis, not just the organic basis that we are so commonly, the carbon basis that we're most familiar with. So why is there so much life here, and we can't seem to find anywhere else? Now, I'm not saying that you won't find life somewhere else. I don't know. That's the thing about you can't prove a negative. You would have to look everywhere else to prove it, and bring a witness. So, what is this thing we call life? What is motivating it to be so consistently present everywhere in our world and nowhere else? Is that just a haphazard genetic coincidence? Not likely. There's some motivating factor that brings life. Life finds a way. It struggles to exist. Just the generations. Why every animal seems to have a lifespan, a limited lifespan. It's like it's programmed into their existence. They've actually done studies now that certain genetic characteristics have a greater influence over the longevity of individuals, whether it's dogs or mice or monkeys. There is genetic markers that will extend the life of the individual. And the presence of certain abilities to produce chemical compounds in your body extends your life. But even though it can do that, extend your life 10, 20 years, maybe 30 years, there still is that point where you're born, you live, you die. And it's built into all creatures. There are a few that undergo, we've talked about them before, that undergo certain sterilizing periods of their existence where they can no longer reproduce, but they also do not die. They continue to live. And so there are these phenomena, but even those things do not really seem to live forever. So what is this design of life, and why is there a limitation on this? So according to the Bible stories, they believe that our life was limited because of sin, because somehow or other we missed the mark. That's what sin is. That's an important topic too. People say sin. Why do you say this is a sin or that is a sin? Because it misses the mark, which is the purpose of that particular thing. Like sexuality. there's a purpose to sexuality, which is reproduction. It's made pleasant, or at least elements of it are made pleasant, in order to induce people, animals, creatures, to reproduce. Otherwise, they would neglect it and forget about it and not reproduce and die out. So it's built into our genetic purpose to reproduce. That is the purpose of sexuality, is to reproduce. If sexuality is used for some other purpose, we call it a sin because it misses the mark of its purpose. So what is the purpose of things like socializing or religion? Well, according to the Bible, it says religion is how you take care of the needy of your society, how you visit and provide for and care for the needy of your society. That's what religion is. Today, religion is defined as what you think. It's not even necessarily what you believe, but what you think about God. Now, of course, we redefine believe to be what you think rather than this motivating conviction. So you start getting these different interpretations of the words that you read in things like the Bible or the Artha Vedas or any kind of holy script that exists throughout the ages. If people change the meaning of words, they change the meaning of those texts because almost nobody goes back to find out what those words meant at the time. So just before the show began, I heard the news report that people were talking about Christians needed to study apologetics and because of the fact that when they go to college, when they go to universities, they are convinced by other people that their faith in their religion, and I'm not talking about faith in God, I'm talking about faith in their religion, is undermined by what they hear. And so they are told that they need to study apologetics so that they will not be vulnerable to these arguments. They'll understand why we believe what we believe. Well, the problem is, if you're going to turn back and study apologetics and become an apologist of your particular faith, you need to understand that almost every faith that is out there today, every religion that is out there today, every denomination out there today is doing at least something contrary to what the early church did and what Christ taught. Christ and the prophets taught, because Christ was not the first one to teach most of what he said. He was often quoting people like Moses and even Abraham, and referring all the way back to Adam and Eve, which is one of the earliest stories in the biblical text, that we're made from the beginning, one man, one woman. And one of the reasons why they're saying that we should study this apologetics is because people are starting to live together, and there's the cessation of marriage, and marriage is not considered to death do you part, but it's until you change your mind or find something better. And the reality is they think that if we teach them apologetics, then this won't happen. And of course, teaching them some apologetics, some form of apologetics, which again, apologetics is the reason why you have your religion. It isn't necessarily anything about what Christ was all about. It's in defense of your religion. The word apologetics comes from a Greek word, which has to do with verbal defense or speech in defense of something. And that what they're trying to get you to defend is your belief in religion, which may include a belief in God, but your religion is a doctrinal, ideological view of God. But the reality, that's not what the Old Testament was talking about. Matter of fact, they spoke against that. You see, you can create God in your imagination and then believe in that creation of God in your mind. You create, how do you do that? You don't necessarily build God out of bricks or stones or carve him out of wood, which would be a graven image, but you carve him out of the bricks of rationalism. You invent a personality that you call God, and you invent that with the bricks of logic and doctrine, and where you take certain ideas that you consider to be fundamental ideas or doctrines or teachings or truths, and you lump them together to create this image of Christ, image of God himself, and then you believe in that image which you have manufactured through the bricks of your own mind and the acceptance of what you call truth. But that is ideology itself. It's just not using bricks and stones, it's using ideas. The concept of God is that there is something greater than you that is the motivating factor in this thing we call creation, this thing we call life. Because that's the amazing thing. To have billions of stars and planets revolving around them throughout the galaxy is insignificant without life. We are made of stardust. We are made of the fabric of the universe. Yet we walk and we talk, we think and we act and react to the environment around us, and we actually reproduce ourselves, or facsimiles thereof. We reproduce our society, the next generation. That is amazing. You go to the moon, you go to the other stars. We don't see that going on. At least we haven't discovered it yet. It seems to be rather rare, far more rare than they thought. Yet on this planet, we see it at every turn. Sagebrush is doing it. Scorpions are doing it. Beetles are doing it. They're reproducing themselves generation after generation after generation for thousands of years. That is this force, life force, that we see all around us, that is following patterns and designs in every species. Where they live, they reproduce, they die. I mean, even fungus sacrifice themselves. They build up a tower of themselves, dying as they do that, in order to get fungus to the top of this tower to release spores to spread the fungus to other places. How did they come to such conclusions and such plans? Did they all sit around at meetings of little fungi trying to figure out how to do this? There is some sort of force. If there is anything to rationalism that is going to define or deduce the truth, you have to look at this process of life that we see everywhere and in awe assume that there is an intelligent designer. That intelligent designer we call God. We cannot put him in a box. We cannot put him in a bottle. We cannot contain him in an idea. We use the heuristic God. Now, when you create religion around that, which has become, like I say, 5 times it mentions religion in the Bible, 4 times it's bad religion. Only 1 time is it good religion, and that is perfect religion. That is how you take care of the needy of your society. All other religions mentioned in the Bible are bad, in reference to that word we see translated as religion. So why are they all bad? Why? What is bad about them? And why is pure religion a good thing? Well, if we're going to study apologetics, we need to understand what religion is, and religion is something that you do. It's not something that you think. That's why it comes from, we see it translated from the Greek word threskia, which is what you do. That's why Jesus said it's not what you say, but what you do. It doesn't have anything to do with earning salvation. That's why everybody says it doesn't matter what you do, it has to do with what you think. But that's not really true either. It's because they translate the word belief into what you think. But belief, again, is this conviction, this motivating force that forces you into a particular pattern or design of existence. It allows you the choice of accepting this pattern or rejecting that pattern. Eating of the tree of the life or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's your choice. But once you make that choice, you are forced in a particular path or pattern. If you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you inherit death. You will inherit challenges. You will inherit confusion. You will inherit fear and anxiety because you've chosen to eat as a source of the tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But if you eat of the tree of life, what is the tree of life? That pattern of God, that pattern of creation, that pattern of living life more abundantly. If you eat of that tree, then you will be forced down another way, another pattern of existence, another pattern of your life. And we hear Jesus talking about that pattern. We hear the apostles talking about that pattern. And unfortunately, we don't always listen to what they have to say, but we create a doctrinal religion around that. We see certain points, like we're against abortion. We see millions of children being aborted and killed in the wombs of their mothers. We even see today women bragging about the fact that they've had numerous abortions, shouting it, celebrating it. And they don't see anything wrong with that. And other people are shocked at that and stunned at that, traumatized by that idea. And so they react against it. But what is it that we really should be doing? What is really following that pattern of life? Christ said, no greater love have we than to lay down our life for our fellow man. If we lay down our life, we may pick up our life more abundantly. Is that a pattern we see in nature? Well, we'll talk about that when we come back to Keys of the Kingdom.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Well, welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom. So, what is one of the keys of the kingdom of heaven? To lay down your life to have life more abundant. And that's a pattern we see throughout creation. We see it in the reproduction of and life cycle of creatures that walk upon the earth, including mankind. Everybody who has had a family knows that to have children is going to require some sacrifice of time, sacrifice of energy, sacrifice of life itself. We pour out our lives in our children. Every animal husband knows this. Jesus talks about it, for a seed to grow, first it must go into the earth and die. You bury it. You bury the seed alive, and it becomes something that it dies to being a seed and becomes a living plant. And it devours itself in order to reproduce. And for the plant to produce the seed to begin with, it took all the energy in its leaves and its stalk and its roots, and it moved them up into the seeds and put them into the seed, and then it dried and withered, holding the seeds up high so that they would be cast out into the world and reseed themselves as they themselves were destroyed again in the earth to be reproduced again as life. Oh, that is an amazing process, and we're supposed to believe that this all came about with no intelligent design whatsoever. That is a huge leap of faith. To not believe in God, the design planner, this intelligent designer of the universe, to not believe in God is a huge leap of faith. And I point this out in many places, that the same arguments that the atheists use to prove that God does not exist is the same arguments that the theist uses to prove that God does exist. Usually, my experience with atheists is that they have a problem with religion. They have a problem with synagogues and churches. It isn't so much that they don't believe in God, because most of them still live as if God existed. But they don't believe in organized religion. So, the question did come up as to what is apologetics. Wondering if apologetics was the use of the Bible to prove a position or argument. Well, of course, it could be, although one of the better apologists that I've seen on the national scene is Ben Shapiro, who tries not to use the Bible to prove his religious beliefs, although he didn't even identify them as religious beliefs, but his positions on life and the interaction of man with man. And that they are formed in him partly by his religious beliefs, but he does not use the Bible to prove them. He uses reason which again takes us back to divine will, right reason, and natural law. Natural law and the God who created nature, nature's God, are also divine will, are also right reason. So what is apologetics? Well, in the most basic definition, it's a reasoned argument, sometimes in writing, as a justification of something, typically a theory or religious doctrine. So apologetics can be just justifying the theory that you can reason everything out, that you can deduce what is true through rationalism. And rationalism is really a method. It's considered a faculty, but it is also, from one point of view, but from another point of view, it's a method by which you deduce what is true and what is not. And in order to do that, you must put value on information in order to use that information in a rational way. You know, what value does this piece of information have in relationship to this piece of information? You have to put values on them because they're going to require an element of importance in order to use those facts in a rational way. Well, how do you put value on facts if 90 or 95% of your thinking is actually subconscious? You're not even aware of where the ideas come from. How do you know? You know, an idea comes up and you think, "Oh my goodness, this is reasonable." How do you know it's true? Well, this is why people reach out to the Bible, is that they take the premise first that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. They believe that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. They believe that in their minds. They accept that as a truth. And then they use the Bible to prove everything else. And I'm not saying that the Bible is not the inspired Word of God, but I'm telling you that the people who read the Bible are often not inspired by God, but they're inspired by hidden motivations in their own life that bubble up through their subconscious into their thinking, so that when they read the Bible, they interpret words according to what will confirm what they already want to believe is true. Somebody told me once, a minister from Montana, Baptist minister from Montana, said the Bible interprets itself. The Bible does not interpret itself. That is an irrational statement, because the Bible doesn't interpret anything. The Bible just is. Men have to read it and then take those words and interpret those words. They will use the Bible, yes, they will use the Bible to, well, if this is so, then this has to agree with this, and this has to agree with that. But I could sit down with individuals like that and bring up quotes in the Bible, quotes out of the mouth of Jesus himself that contradicts what they are often doing. And they will, having read the Bible many times, they will say, it doesn't say that in the Bible, and I will pull it out and I'll show them it says that. Not even out of context, in the context. And they will say, well, I never saw that. You've read the Bible, many times, but you never saw that. Because you weren't reading the Bible to find out the truth. You were reading the Bible as an apologetics to prove you were right. You weren't. If that's your motivation, to prove that your belief is right, you've already prejudiced your thinking. And so this is the problem. So no, apologetics, real apologetics, wise apologetics, does not simply use the Bible to prove the truth. It may go back, once you see the truth and are speaking of the truth, you may go back and use quotes from the Bible to verify that what you're saying is true, but more often than not, you'll probably, if you're talking to somebody who also holds the Bible in high esteem, you're using the Bible to pry them loose from the wreckage of their own beliefs. And I've talked about that many times, how people often grab onto a religion or religion itself as a sort of a life vest, a floating device in a sea of confusion. They're going mad because they cannot make sense out of life, and they find a religion that helps them make some sense out of life, and they cling to that. It's not the whole of God, it's not even God himself, but it has an image of God that they can accept, and it gives them the emotional support they can accept, and that nourishes them so that they don't just go nuts and commit suicide. You know, I always think of Nietzsche, who everybody considered to be such a great genius, and he was a very clever guy. I mean, he got his doctorate and his professorship by the time he was 24. But by the time he was, I think, 34, he had lost it. And by the time he was 45, I think he was dead already. Anyway, he was in a mental institution for about 10 years. He'd gone completely nuts. And, you know, he evidently had a bad experience with churchianity, religion, and he threw it out of his life, and with it, he threw out God. And he really wasn't so much against God, although he says a lot of things. You could see, if you read his writings, there are times when he seems angry, and he says certain things that he is saying from anger. Cleverly, he says them, because he was a smart guy. Because I've done a great deal of reading about Nietzsche and what he says and everything recently, working on the next book. But the reality is that he believed that we murdered God. And specifically, he believes that the church murdered God. And that they used the Bible to do it. But again, it was their interpretation of what it says in the biblical text. And the doctrines of their religion, the orthodox doctrines of their religion that they used to murder God. They actually used the words of the Bible to murder God and the meaning of God and the meaning of the myths that we see, or the stories that we see in the Bible of Adam and Eve and Abraham and Moses. Now, he was living back in the 1800s, and he had a limited view of what many scientists are discovering today. And certainly he had a limited view of history, because we've discovered so much by discovering ancient texts and then making them available and having people, you know, I mean, literally, you can go online and read the Dead Sea Scrolls down to the very fibers of the pages, because you can blow them up and look at each letter by letter, word by word, and read the Dead Sea Scrolls. They hadn't even found them yet in the 1800s, along with Rosetta Stones and everything else, that we have so much more knowledge about the ancient past. But the truth is, most reasoning, or what we call rationalism, this reasoning things out, is heavily dependent upon intuition, what they call intuition. They like to use the word intuition rather than revelation, and to some degree that is a good idea, because intuition is something that pops into your mind from who knows where, but clearly by way of your subconscious. But we don't know what's going on in the subconscious. Why is that idea in the subconscious? Did it come from trauma? Did it come from evil spirits? Did it come from something we saw or read some ancient time in our own Did it come from epigenetics? There is a genetic memory that actually where people with no possible way of learning certain things, they're playing pianos at 3. They come on to a piano, they've never seen one before, and they start hitting the keys, and within minutes they're playing the piano. And they're playing music in the piano. Where did they get such an ability? Where did they get such a skill? We have savants now that seem to know things that there's no way that they could have known this. No one could have taught them this. They just simply know mechanics. And their conclusion is that, and there's reason for this. They've actually done experiments, and we've talked about it before, with laboratory mice and what have you, where that you teach a mouse to go through a maze through trial and error, and then they take the mouse out. It has offspring, and then you put its offspring into the same maze, and they figure it out way quicker, as if they have some sort of pre-existing knowledge recorded in their very DNA as to how to get through that maze, as compared to a mouse that parents did not ever go through the maze. Well, they say that there's literally a genetic memory, and of course that's just in mice. Is there also and the study of twins taken away at birth from each other and from their parents, and children who were mixed up in the hospital and taken and raised with different parents. They have abilities and perceptions, and even come up with words. They're naming their pets and their children the same way their twin is naming them somewhere else. What is that? Is this genetic memory? Is there something more? I've told the story about the child that was given away because their mother was a teenage pregnancy, and her parents didn't allow her to keep the daughter, and she didn't believe in divorce, but she didn't believe in abortion. So she gave the child away, and then she ended up marrying the boy who was the father of the child when they got out of high school, got out of college, but they never could have children again. Years later, in another city, she's wanting to retire and turn her business over to one of her employees, and she has several employees, quite a few employees. And she's turning it over to one of her employees, and she's re-examining the resume when that employee came to work for them. And she discovers that employee was born on the same day that she gave birth to her daughter. And then she discovered that employee is her daughter. Her husband and her were still together, never had a child. But of all the places, 8 million people in the city, her daughter is working for her. They're already bound so much together, she wants to turn her business over to this girl who she thinks is just somebody who came to work for her and is actually her daughter. You can't make this stuff up. So there's a lot more going on in the universe than what we want to imagine you can see in a test tube or under an electron microscope. So anyway, back to apologetics. Apologetics is a reasoned argument to justify something. Can you use the Bible? Yeah, but you better understand the Bible. And I don't believe you can understand the Bible unless you also receive revelation. It is not an intellectual pursuit. If it was an intellectual pursuit, eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil would be a good thing. It's not a good thing. It takes you down a dangerous path, which is why one of the arguments that most atheists use is that religion has caused the deaths of millions of people and the oppression of millions upon millions of people generation after generation. From religious armies marching in and taking over countries and inquisitions and Holocaust are all based on this conflict of religion. What all that is based on is eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If your religion is a product of rationalism alone, then your religion is probably going to lead to death, because that's what eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil does. It leads to death. It leads to confusion. It leads to conflict. Your children will be bashing each other's brains out. That's what it leads to. There will be dictators rising up in your midst. The more you think you can rationalize these things out. Now I'm not saying that divine will is not reasonable. I'm just saying you cannot arrive at it with your own efforts and thinking. You need the intuition of God, which we call revelation. You personally need revelation. That's what you need. So we're going to talk more and more about this and go into it a little bit deeper in the second half of the show, but just taking a quick cursory look at, if we go all the way back to Aristotle, we can see certain things in ancient history that they understood that there was this idea of revelation that was necessary. They use the word intuition. Intuition is the faculty by which the mind gains a knowledge of those universal truths which are the starting point of a demonstrative reasoning. So intuition is knowing something before reasoning even begins to take place. And because you read it in the Bible, you don't necessarily know something unless you have already raised the Bible up to the rank of God. The Bible is the inspired words of the authors coming down to us through translators who often were not inspired. We pick up the Bible and we already have preconceived notions of ideas and concepts and philosophies, and, just like I say, the definition of religion, which I like to go back to because it's so fundamental. If religion has changed from the pious performance of a duty to God and your fellow man to what you think about God, if it has changed that much, those two definitions of religion existed just a couple hundred years apart, much less 2,000 years apart, then how in the world can you read the Bible if they have changed you even think that the Bible is about religion, yet it mentions it 5 times, the word anyway. But once you understand that religion is how you take care of the needy of society, how you perform your duty to your fellow man, which is not to bludgeon him over the head or to force him to pay for your abortion or to force him to pay for your welfare or force him to pay for your Social Security. None of that has to do, that is all impure religion. That is all against God. But yet you do that. You want to force your neighbor to pay for your kid's schooling. You think, well, they forced me first, so now you get to force them. You see, you really have to get back to some basic fundamental understanding, and most of that is setting down baggage. Albert Einstein said that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. What is that gift? Where does that sacred gift of the intuitive mind come from? That's the tree of life. That's the Holy Spirit. What is the rational mind? That's the tree of knowledge. You're just not supposed to eat of the tree of knowledge. You're not supposed to cut it down. You're not supposed... God's truth is reasonable. You just can't reason to it. If that were true, you could create God. And that's what most religions are doing. They're creating God in your mind. That's what they use the Bible for, to create God, an image of God in your mind. The Bible is used more for the production of idolatry in the world today than any other book. It has been that way for century upon century upon century. But to the intuitive mind, to the mind that would receive revelation from God, from that designer of the universe, the mind, that the soul, the same word that you see translated into soul in the Old Testament is also translated mind in the Old Testament. Same word. So if you're mind, body, and spirit, not mind, body, and soul, but mind, soul, and spirit, what is moving your mind, body, and spirit? Is it God? Or is it some lesser God? Well, we'll talk more about that when we return to Keys of the Kingdom.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.